A promotion feels like a win at first. Your salary increases, your title changes, and LinkedIn fills with congratulations. But quietly, the sense of risk grows along with the income. The higher your position, the more there is to protect. Reputation, lifestyle, and other people's expectations begin compounding around you. You realize you are no longer just working for income, but managing volatility in your own image. At some point, the latter stops feeling optional. You stay not because of passion, but because your time horizon feels locked in. The climb turns into a long-term commitment with emotional drawdown. We were taught that promotions equal security. Higher titles were supposed to reduce financial risk over the long term. Yet sometimes the stability exists more in perception than in actual margin. Today, we are unpacking something rarely discussed. Not the salary itself, but the psychology behind staying. Because sometimes the real trap is not money, but identity compounding over time. Since childhood, we were trained to level up. Move to the next grade, the next rank, the next stage. The logic felt simple. Higher means success. When we enter the workforce, the pattern stays the same. Entry level is framed as temporary. The target is always the next title. There is nothing wrong with ambition. The risk begins when we assume promotion automatically reduces uncertainty. That assumption is rarely stress-tested over a long-term horizon. A higher role usually means higher income. It also increases fixed costs and social expectations. Lifestyle volatility tends to rise with it. We see senior leaders as symbols of stability. They look composed behind glass offices. What we do not see is the different type of pressure they carry. A promotion often feels like validation. It signals that the market values our time. Our brain quietly links that feeling to self-worth. That validation becomes addictive over time. We start optimizing for recognition instead of margin. The compounding effect is psychological, not financial. At some point, money stops being the only driver. We work to maintain status and avoid perceived drawdown. Status quietly demands constant maintenance. Without noticing, the goal quietly shifts. We move from building financial resilience to protecting professional image. The transition is subtle, but the long-term impact can shape our entire time horizon. A new title feels like proof that you are progressing. Your parents sound more relieved, and your friends treat you slightly differently. Social circles quietly adjust to your new perceived status. LinkedIn becomes a small stage for professional identity. Every update feels like a public milestone. Digital applause creates a measurable sense of validation. Validation can quietly become addictive over time. The more frequently it appears, the more your brain expects it. Without noticing, your emotional baseline starts to depend on it. A stable title creates the appearance of low risk. Behind the scenes, anxiety about volatility may still exist, but the image must remain steady for everyone watching. Over time, your ego links itself to your job title. If the title disappears, the identity feels threatened. Few people pause to calculate that risk clearly. Often, the fear is not purely about income loss. It is about losing recognition from others. Recognition begins to feel like part of your core identity. At that point, a career shifts its function. It moves from income generation to self-worth measurement. The transition happens gradually, almost invisibly. When identity attaches to position, psychological drawdown becomes possible. The volatility is emotional before it is financial. That risk often compounds silently over a long time horizon. Now you are not only protecting a paycheck, you are protecting how others perceive you. Carrying both pressures over time becomes mentally exhausting. Every salary increase quietly upgrades your lifestyle. A better apartment and a more comfortable car start to feel reasonable. Over time, comfort becomes the new baseline, not a luxury. The problem is that new expenses rarely move backward. Once your standard rises, it becomes fixed in your long-term budget. And fixed costs quietly reduce your flexibility. A mortgage, a car loan, additional insurance policies. Each decision makes sense in isolation. Together, they create long-term commitments with real risk exposure. You are no longer just an employee earning income. You become the operator of a personal cost system. And that system depends on consistent cash flow. This is the turning point most people ignore. We are not criticizing ambition, we are examining structure, because structure determines your time horizon. At the margin, money is not motivation. It is a system of inflow, outflow, and volatility. When you understand the math, emotion becomes quieter. Status often increases financial pressure, not through dramatic events, but through small repeated upgrades. Compounding works on expenses too. The higher the lifestyle, the narrower the margin. A narrow margin increases sensitivity to volatility and income drawdown. That sensitivity often feels like anxiety. When living costs are high, choices shrink. And choice is the core of long-term financial freedom. Without optionality, income can start to feel like a trap. Let's zoom out and look at the full pattern. I call this the identity lock-in model. It explains why climbing feels like progress, but slowly reduces your risk tolerance over time. First comes status. Status improves your social position and signals upward mobility. Over a long-term time horizon, that signal starts to feel like identity, not just income. Then comes validation. Promotions, titles, and praise reinforce the new version of you. That reinforcement compounds quietly, making the identity feel permanent. Next is the lifestyle upgrade. Higher income increases fixed costs and narrows flexibility. What felt like progress slowly increases your exposure to financial volatility. Then comes financial pressure. Bills arrive regardless of your energy or motivation. The system does not adjust for burnout or drawdown in your mental capital. Over time, your optionality shrinks. Leaving the job starts to look like unacceptable risk. What once felt like choice now feels like constraint. Finally, fear enters the system. Not fear of poverty, but fear of losing status and falling behind. The real volatility becomes psychological, not financial. This cycle keeps people in place longer than they intended. It is rarely love for the job that keeps them there. It is identity risk, not market risk. And that is the trap. The corporate ladder does not only lift you upward. It quietly locks the doors beneath your feet. The higher your title, the narrower your experiments become. You cannot just try something new without calculating the risk. The cost of volatility increases with every promotion. Early in your career, switching jobs felt like adjusting direction. Now every move affects your reputation and social capital. The social drawdown often feels heavier than the financial one. A bigger salary often creates bigger dependency. Not because it is insufficient, but because more lives orbit around it. Your income becomes a central system with concentrated risk. Ironically, senior roles often reduce flexibility. Your time horizon shrinks under constant responsibility, and flexibility is one of the strongest forms of long-term security. Some people call this golden handcuffs. It looks polished from the outside, but restraint is still restraint even when it shines. The issue is rarely the company itself. The issue is risk concentration in one identity and one paycheck. When everything compounds in one place, volatility hits harder. If that single source shakes, everything around it shakes too. There is no backup identity to absorb the drawdown, and no alternative leverage to stabilize momentum. This is why layoffs feel deeply personal. It is not just a loss of income. It feels like a sudden identity drawdown. When your job becomes your only definition of value, losing it feels like losing yourself. The psychological impact can outweigh the financial volatility. And rebuilding identity takes time, not just money. We've reached the real question. If status doesn't create security, then what actually does? The answer isn't a higher title, it's leverage. Leverage means having options. Options mean you are not trapped in a single income stream with full exposure to volatility. And that reduces silent financial risk. Transferable skills are a form of leverage. Titles depend on company structure, but skills survive market drawdown. Skills travel across industries and time horizons. A real network is also leverage. Not business cards, but mutual value built over time. Compounding trust often beats short-term visibility. Productive assets create financial leverage. A small business, long-term investments, or a side project expand your time horizon. Multiple income sources soften potential drawdown. Leverage rarely looks glamorous. It often feels slow and invisible during the early compounding phase, but it quietly increases long-term stability. Status needs recognition to feel valuable. Leverage works even if nobody notices. It cares about optionality, not applause. The more options you have, the lower your emotional volatility. Lower volatility leads to clearer decisions under pressure. This is where real security begins to form. Security is not about how high your title sounds. Security is the ability to say no without panic and still be financially stable afterward. This is not an argument against working hard. It is an invitation to reassess your time horizon and what you believe it leads to. Before climbing faster, ask what outcome you are actually optimizing for. If your goal is security, measure it by options, not by title. A title can disappear during volatility or corporate drawdown cycles. Real stability is the number of choices you retain under pressure. Start building skills outside your job description. Focus on abilities that survive industry volatility and extend your long-term compounding potential. Promotions reward relevance, but transferable skills protect resilience. Set aside time for small projects with a long-term mindset. Not for quick income spikes, but to reduce identity concentration risk. Diversification is not only for portfolios, it applies to who you are. Do not let your entire self-worth live inside one business card. That is concentration risk disguised as ambition. And concentration risk increases emotional drawdown when disruption happens. Reduce unnecessary lifestyle expansion. Give your budget room to breathe across different time horizons. Margin reduces volatility in your personal system and increases flexibility. Train yourself to be comfortable without constant validation. External applause is volatile and rarely aligned with your long-term interest. When approval stops driving decisions, your risk tolerance becomes clearer. The fewer fixed costs you must defend, the lighter you move. Light systems absorb volatility better over time. Flexibility is a quiet form of strength in uncertain cycles. You can still climb the corporate ladder if you choose. But now you understand the structural risk and the volatility attached to it. Awareness does not stop ambition, it simply removes naivety. Hard work is not the problem, ambition is not the enemy. The real risk is ambition without awareness of your time horizon and personal limits. Promotion is fine, but it becomes a trap when your lifestyle expands faster than your margin. Status should never outrun your flexibility in a volatile system. Real security is not looking successful. It is staying calm even during volatility and temporary drawdown. That calm often comes from leverage built through long-term compounding. If this feels personal, it may be because you are inside the system right now. Feeling pressure does not mean you failed. It simply reflects how risk and incentives are structured. If you want to understand modern money systems without hype or false promises, stay with the margin. Here, we focus on risk, long-term positioning, and clarity over noise. We do not chase status, we build options.